The setting sun bled orange and gold across the pavement, casting long, distorted shadows that stretched like accusations. From where I stood, the world seemed split in two. There was her world, bathed in the warm, ethereal glow of the late afternoon, a universe contained in the gleam of a silver Rolls-Royce, and then there was mine, standing in the encroaching cool of the evening shade, a place where the air itself felt thin and worthless. A tear, hot and traitorous, escaped my left eye, tracing a cold path down my cheek. It was followed by another and then another, until my vision of her swam and fractured into 1,000 shimmering pieces of pain. Clara. She was smiling, a wide, genuine smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. It was aimed at him, the man in the perfectly tailored suit whose polished shoes reflected the neon sign of the cafe behind them. The sign just said cafe in a lazy, buzzing script of red and blue, a beacon for a life I was no longer a part of. She was still in her waitress uniform, the simple black dress and white apron, but leaning against the impossible luxury of that car, she looked like she was already wearing a gown. He said something, his head tilted towards her, and she laughed. The sound didn't reach me, swallowed by the rumble of city traffic and the frantic, hollow drumming in my own chest. But I saw it. I saw the way her head tilted back, the easy grace in her posture, the light catching in her blonde hair. She was a different person, a stranger sculpted from the memory of the woman I loved. He held the passenger door open, a gesture of effortless chivalry that felt like a physical blow. She didn't look back, not once. She didn't scan the crowd or glance over her shoulder toward the life she was leaving behind on the curb. She simply got in, disappearing into an interior of muted leather and silent, promised comfort. I was invisible, a ghost on a busy Brooklyn street, watching my entire world drive away in a cloud of quiet, expensive exhaust. The single tear on my cheek felt like it was carving a canyon into my skin. If you've ever felt that kind of cold shock, the kind that steals the air from your lungs and makes the world go silent, do me a favor and just tap that like button. It's a small thing, but it helps to know you're not the only one who's ever stood on that lonely patch of sidewalk. The truth is, my world didn't end there, shivering as the taillights vanished into the river of evening traffic. In a way, that was the moment it began. But to understand how that broken 21-year-old kid on the curb became the man he is today, you have to understand the life that car drove away from. You have to go back 2 years, to a tiny fifth-floor walk-up, where the future was built on a foundation of instant ramen and unwavering belief. Our apartment was less a home and more a cramped nest we'd built against the world. It was on the top floor of a creaking building in a forgotten corner of Brooklyn, a place where the pipes groaned in the winter and the summer heat was a physical presence. The scent of our life was a mix of Clara's diner uniform, a permanent perfume of burnt coffee and fried potatoes, and the ozone crackle from my ancient, overworked computer. For 2 years, that little space was our entire universe, and for most of that time it was enough. Clara was my gravity. When she came home from a 10-hour shift, her feet aching and her smile tired, she would collapse onto our lumpy couch, and I would tell her about the worlds I was building. I wasn't a writer or an artist. I was a coder, a digital architect. My project, my obsession, was something I called Nexus. It was a data analysis concept, a way of seeing patterns in the chaos of information, of predicting trends with an accuracy that felt like magic. I saw it everywhere. I saw algorithms in the way raindrops raced each other down our grimy window pane, in the traffic patterns on the street below, in the ebb and flow of customers at her diner. To me, Nexus was alive. It was the key that would unlock everything, a revolutionary idea that I swore would change the world. To Clara, it was a series of incomprehensible green numbers and symbols flickering on a dusty screen. It was the reason we were eating ramen for the 4th night in a row. It was another one of my beautiful, expensive dreams that kept the electric bill in the past due pile. She tried to believe in it. In the beginning, she truly did. She'd bring me coffee, rub my tense shoulders as I hunched over the keyboard for the 18th hour straight, and listen with a patient sort of fondness as I explained the intricate beauty of a predictive sequence. "You're a genius, Leo," she would say, her voice soft with a mixture of awe and exhaustion. "I know you're going to make it." And I believed her. I loved the girl who saw starlight in my eyes, who believed my potential was a tangible thing, as real as the rent we struggled to pay. But potential doesn't keep the lights on. It doesn't fix a leaking faucet or buy a new pair of work shoes when the old ones have holes in the soles. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the exhaustion began to outweigh the fondness. The weight of our reality started to crush the fragile architecture of our shared dream. I was so lost in the world of Nexus, so convinced that our breakthrough was just one elegant line of code away, that I didn't see the foundation of our life cracking beneath my feet. I didn't notice when her smiles became a little tighter, her patience a little thinner. I didn't notice the way her eyes would linger on couples in the park who had the simple, boring stability we lacked. Then, he started coming to the diner. She never mentioned him by name at first. He was just the Tuesday guy. A CEO, she'd said, who always sat in her section. He was polite, tipped outrageously, and actually looked at her when she spoke. He didn't see a tired waitress smelling of grease. He saw a woman, Marcus Thorne. The name finally surfaced a few months later, dropped casually into a conversation about a particularly rough shift. He drove a Rolls-Royce, she mentioned, a silver one. She said it with a strange, almost wistful tone, as if describing a creature from a different planet. That car, that name, began to occupy a space in our small apartment. It was an unspoken presence, a symbol of everything I wasn't, of everything I couldn't provide. It represented a world of penthouse views and effortless comfort, a world where you didn't have to choose between fixing a laptop and buying groceries. I tried to ignore it. I poured myself deeper into Nexus, working with a frantic desperation, fueled by black coffee and the growing fear that I was losing her. I told myself that once Nexus was finished, I could give her 100 silver cars. But all she could see was the present, the flickering lights, the empty cupboards, the brilliant boyfriend who was, for all intents and purposes, completely and utterly broke. The final thread snapped on a cold Thursday night in November. It was raining, a miserable, chilling drizzle that seemed to seep through the window frames and into our bones. I had been working on a critical part of the algorithm, a breakthrough that had my heart pounding with excitement, when the screen flickered violently, turned a sickening shade of blue, and then went black. A final, pathetic fizzing sound came from the machine's guts, and then silence. The ancient laptop, the vessel of my entire world, the machine that held the culmination of 2 years of my life, was dead. I just stood there, staring at the blank screen, a cold dread washing over me. It felt like my own heart had stopped beating. I took it to a 24-hour repair shop down the street, my hands shaking. The gruff man behind the counter took one look at it, grunted, and gave me the verdict. The motherboard was fried. It would be $500 to replace it. $500. It might as well have been $1 million. I walked back to the apartment, the cold rain soaking through my thin jacket, the number echoing in my head. $500. Clara was home sitting on the edge of the bed, counting the crumpled tips from her shift. Her face was already etched with a familiar weariness. When I told her what happened, when I asked, my voice barely a whisper, if there was any way we could pull the money together, something inside her visibly broke. The last glimmer of hope in her eyes was extinguished. She looked at me, and for the first time, she didn't see the boy genius she'd fallen in love with. She saw a dead end. She saw a black hole of need that threatened to swallow her whole. "I can't do this anymore, Leo," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the warmth, the life that I had always known. It was the voice of a stranger. "I can't keep pouring my life, my energy, every single dollar I earn into a fantasy. I am so tired of funding a fantasy." The word hung in the air between us, ugly and sharp. Fantasy. She called my life's work a fantasy. I tried to argue, to explain that we were so close, that this was just a temporary setback, but the words wouldn't come. My throat was tight with a grief so profound it felt like I was choking. There was nothing left to say. The belief was gone. She stood up, her movements calm and deliberate, and began to pack a small bag. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. That, somehow, was the worst part. The emotion was already spent. This was just a transaction, the closing of a failed account. That evening, as I stood shivering on the sidewalk outside the Sparrow's Nest, clutching a dead laptop in a plastic bag, I watched her walk out of that diner for the last time. I had followed her, desperate to say something. I don't even know what, but I was too late. I was just in time to see Marcus Thorne waiting for her. Just in time to see her smile, that brilliant, heartbreaking smile, and disappear into a life of polished chrome and silent chauffeured drives, leaving me alone with the crushing weight of a failure she had finally given a name. For a long time, I just stood there. The city moved on around me. Sirens wailed in the distance. A bus hissed to a stop. People brushed past me on their way to lives that hadn't just been shattered on the pavement, but in my world, time had frozen. The spot where the Rolls-Royce had been was an empty space that screamed louder than any noise on the street. My legs felt like they were made of concrete, my lungs of ash. The dead laptop in my hand was a tombstone for a future that had just been buried. I don't know how long I stood there before the cold finally pierced the numbness. It wasn't just the November chill. It was a deep, internal winter, a cold that started in my bones and spread outwards. I started walking with no destination in mind, just moving to prove to myself that I still could. The word she used echoed with every step. Fantasy, fantasy, fantasy. It was a drumbeat of failure. She hadn't just left me, she had invalidated my entire existence. The 2 years of sacrifice, of shared ramen and whispered dreams in the dark, it was all just a childish game to her, a story she'd grown tired of. I ended up in the one place that felt like a sanctuary, a place where ideas weren't fantasies but possibilities. The university library. I wasn't a student anymore. I'd dropped out to focus on Nexus, but the security guard at the front desk was old, and his eyesight was poor. I slipped past him and found a deserted carrel in the back, the air thick with the smell of old paper and quiet ambition. I sat there until the sun came up, the dead laptop on the desk in front of me like a body at a wake. I wasn't coding. I wasn't thinking. I was just empty. The pain was so vast it had no features. It was a blank white landscape of loss. It was in that grey hour before dawn, when the cleaners were starting their rounds and the world felt held in a silent breath, that a voice cut through the fog. "Leo Maxwell, is that you?" I looked up. Standing there was Professor Alistair Finch. He had been my advanced algorithms professor, a man with a wild mane of white hair, mismatched socks and eyes that twinkled with a fierce, restless intelligence. He was the one person who had truly understood what I was trying to build with Nexus. He saw the elegance, the terrifying potential. He looked at me, then at the dead laptop, and his expression softened from surprise to a deep, knowing sadness. "My boy," he said, pulling up a chair, "you look like you've been through a war." I told him everything. The words came out in a broken, halting torrent, about Clara, the diner, the CEO, the Rolls-Royce, and about the $500. I spoke of it like it was the key to a lost kingdom, an impossible sum that had cost me everything. When I was finished, a raw silence hung between us. He didn't offer platitudes or easy comfort. He just sat there, his gaze fixed on my face, really seeing me. He saw the wreckage. "She made a choice, Leo," he finally said, his voice a low rumble. "She chose certainty over possibility. Many people do. It is the safer path, but it is rarely the path that leads to greatness." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into mine. "The question is, what choice will you make now? Will you let her definition of you become your reality? Will you let a broken piece of hardware define your spirit?" He reached into the worn leather satchel he always carried and pulled out a checkbook. He scribbled for a moment, tore out the check and pushed it across the table. It was for $1,000. "This is not a gift," he said, his voice firm. "It is an investment. In you. In Nexus. Pay me back when you can. Now go fix your machine. And then I want you to do something for me. I want you to make them regret it." The words were quiet, but they landed like a lit match on dry tinder. Make them regret it. It wasn't about revenge. It was about vindication. It was about proving that my dream was not a fantasy. It was a future she had been too blind to see. A flicker of something, a hot, defiant spark, ignited in the cold emptiness of my chest. The next 2 years were a blur of deliberate, monastic solitude. I didn't go back to the apartment. I couldn't. I packed my few belongings in a single box and walked away from the ghost of our shared life. The $1,000 from Professor Finch was a sacred trust. $500 went to repairing the laptop. The remaining $500 rented me a space that would become my entire world. A windowless, single-car garage in an industrial part of Queens, sandwiched between an auto body shop and a wholesale plumbing supply. The air smelled of oil, metal, and damp concrete. My bed was a mattress on the floor in the corner. My kitchen was a hot plate and a mini fridge. My entire existence was contained within those 4 cinder-block walls, and my only companion was the resurrected glow of my computer screen. The pain of Clara's departure didn't fade. Instead, I learned to use it. I channeled it. It became a fuel, a cold, clean-burning energy that demanded focus and discipline. Every time a wave of grief threatened to pull me under, I would picture her laughing in that silver car. Every time doubt crept in, I would hear her voice saying the word fantasy. It became my mantra and my motivation. I didn't just resurrect Nexus. I broke it down and rebuilt it from the ground up, making it stronger, faster, and more terrifyingly accurate than before. But I quickly realized that genius wasn't enough. Clara and Marcus had taught me a brutal lesson. In the real world, power wasn't just about having the best idea. It was about knowing how to wield it. My brilliance was a rapier, but I was facing an army equipped with cannons. I needed armor. I needed strategy. So I divided my time. 16 hours a day were for coding, for perfecting the algorithm. The other 4 were for education. I became a voracious, obsessive student of the world I intended to conquer. I devoured books on corporate finance, marketing, contract law, and hostile takeovers. I downloaded university lectures on behavioral economics and game theory. I studied the lives of industrial titans and Wall Street predators, not for inspiration, but for tactical knowledge. I learned their language, their methods, their ruthlessness. The dreamer who saw algorithms in raindrops was being systematically replaced by a strategist who saw vulnerabilities in balance sheets. 1 year into my self-imposed exile, Nexus was ready for its first real test. I scraped together my last few dollars and bought access to a trove of historical stock market data. I fed it all into the system. For 72 hours, the fans on my laptop whirred like a jet engine, as Nexus churned through decades of information, learning, adapting, and identifying patterns no human mind could ever hope to see. Then it began to make predictions. Small at first, it predicted the minor fluctuation of a tech stock with 98% accuracy. It forecasted the quarterly earnings of a retail chain down to the second decimal point. It was working. It was more than working. It was a revelation. I needed a name, an identity for the company that didn't yet exist outside of that garage. I thought of the fire, the ashes of my old life, and the defiant spark Professor Finch had ignited. Phoenix Data. It was a promise to myself, a declaration that I had risen from the ruin she had left me in. I used the last of my funds and the predictive power of Nexus to make a few small, incredibly risky stock trades. The first one netted me $5,000. I reinvested it. The next, $20,000. I kept rolling it, leveraging the algorithm's foresight with a cold, calculated nerve I didn't know I possessed. Within 6 months, I had turned a few $100s into over $200,000. It was enough. It was the seed. I legally incorporated Phoenix Data. I hired my first 2 employees, 2 brilliant but overlooked coders I found on an obscure forum, people who cared more about the purity of the work than a fancy office. I paid them well and told them nothing about myself. To them, I was just Mr. Maxwell, a reclusive genius who communicated through encrypted emails and video calls where my face was always in shadow. I decided early on to remain a ghost. Anonymity was my greatest asset. The world could know of Phoenix Data. They could marvel at its power. But Leo Maxwell, the broke kid from the 5th floor walk-up, would remain invisible. It was a shield against my past and a weapon for my future. It allowed my company's legend to grow untethered to a person, to become a myth, an enigma. And enigmas, I was learning, were far more powerful than men. Occasionally, I would allow myself a brief, painful glimpse into the world I had lost. I would search her name online. Clara had blossomed in her new environment. She was no longer a waitress. She was Marcus Thorne's constant companion, photographed at charity galas and society events. Her tired smile was gone, replaced by a practiced, polished radiance. She wore designer gowns that cost more than my garage. She stood beside Marcus, a perfect accessory to his life of inherited wealth and established power. Each picture was a fresh stab of the knife, but it was a necessary pain. It reminded me what I was fighting. They represented the old world, the one that valued pedigree and presentation over raw, disruptive talent. They were the gatekeepers, and I was building the key to break down their gates. One evening I saw an article in a business journal about Thorne Capital, Marcus's firm. It was a fawning piece about his traditional values and steady hand in a volatile market. The article quoted him as saying, "In a world of fleeting digital fantasies, we believe in tangible assets, in real-world value you can see and touch." Digital fantasies. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. He was using her words, or perhaps she was using his. It didn't matter. The message was the same. To their world, I was nothing, a ghost, a fantasy. I turned back to my screen, the glow illuminating the stark walls of my garage. The latest prediction from Nexus was displayed in crisp green text. It was a bold one, forecasting the imminent collapse of a mid-level investment firm that had ignored digital trends. It was a company very much like Thorn Capital. I initiated the trade. A cold smile touched my lips for the first time in a very long time. They believed in the tangible world. I would show them how easily that world could be dismantled by a ghost. The garage years ended not with a bang, but with a quiet transaction. One of Nexus's predictions, a complex forecast on the global semiconductor market, was so flawlessly accurate that a boutique hedge fund in Singapore, one of my first clients, saw a 4,000% return in a single quarter. They paid their performance bonus without question. The wire transfer that hit my account was for $32 million. I stared at the number on my screen for a full hour, the string of zeros looking alien and unreal against the backdrop of my grimy garage. The money wasn't a celebration, it was an emancipation. It was the key that unlocked the next phase of the plan. Within a year, Phoenix Data was no longer operating out of a garage in Queens. Its headquarters was now a silent, gleaming monument to minimalist power, occupying the top 3 floors of a new skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. The Phoenix Tower, the press had started calling it. From my office, a glass-walled cage overlooking the city, Central Park was a green rectangle in a sea of concrete and ambition. I was still a ghost, but now I haunted a palace. My team had grown. Sarah and Ben, the 2 coders I'd hired from the forum, were now the heads of their own divisions, managing teams of the brightest minds I could find. They still only knew me as the disembodied voice on a secure line, the shadowed figure on a video call. The public face of Phoenix Data was a man named David Chen, a brilliant battle-scarred veteran of Wall Street whom I'd poached from a rival firm. David was in his late 50s, with a mind like a steel trap and a face that betrayed no emotion. He handled the press, the client meetings, the handshakes. He was the perfect frontman, a tangible presence for the world to interact with, while I remained the phantom architect, the unseen god in the machine. I had also changed. The lanky, disheveled dreamer was gone, buried under layers of discipline and intention. I now wore bespoke suits from Savile Row, not because I cared for fashion, but because they were armor, a uniform that communicated a silent, unassailable authority. My diet was no longer instant ramen. It was whatever my personal chef prepared to optimize cognitive function. I had learned that to operate at this level, the body had to be as ruthlessly efficient as the code. But the wealth, the power, the panoramic view of the city, it was all hollow. It was a meticulously constructed stage, and I was the only one who knew the play was a tragedy. The cold diamond of pain was still lodged in my chest, a permanent fixture. Sometimes late at night, when the city was a glittering tapestry of lights below, I would let the memory of her surface. The smell of burnt coffee, the sound of her tired sigh, the empty space on the curb where the Rolls-Royce had been. These were not weaknesses. They were focusing agents. They were the whetstone on which I sharpened my resolve. While Phoenix rose, Thorn Capital began its slow, inexorable decline. It wasn't a dramatic collapse, but a steady, relentless erosion, like a cliff face beaten by the tide. Marcus Thorn was a relic, a man who believed that business was conducted on golf courses and in smoke-filled club rooms. He trusted his gut, his lineage, his old-world connections. He saw data as a tool for accountants, not a strategic weapon. His firm was bleeding, and he didn't even know where the wounds were. The irony was a bitter masterpiece. Many of the nimble, aggressive firms that were systematically dismantling his client base were secretly powered by my algorithm. They were using Nexus to anticipate market shifts, identify undervalued assets, and poach Thorn's most valuable accounts with surgical precision. Marcus was being outmaneuvered at every turn by the very digital fantasy he so arrogantly dismissed. I watched it all through the cold, omniscient eye of Nexus. I had the system monitoring every financial report, every press release, every market rumor connected to his firm. I saw their quarterly profits dip, then dip again. I read an internal memo, leaked from their server, in which Marcus blamed the losses on unprecedented market volatility and the reckless gambling of these new tech funds. He was a king, blaming a hurricane on a change in the weather, completely oblivious to the atmospheric pressures that had created the storm. The time came about 18 months after I'd moved into the Phoenix Tower. I called a meeting with David, Sarah, and Ben in the main boardroom. It was the first time I had ever appeared before my two original coders in person. I walked in, and they both stood, their eyes wide with a mixture of shock and awe. They were finally seeing the ghost. On the massive screen that covered one wall, I pulled up a live, comprehensive analysis of Thorn Capital. It was a digital autopsy of a company that was still breathing. Their debt-to-equity ratio, their client attrition rate, their portfolio's exposure to declining sectors, it was all laid bare in stark, unforgiving graphs and charts. For the next 18 months, I said, my voice calm and even in the silent room, this will be our primary long-term project. We are not going to partner with them. We are not going to compete with them. We are going to acquire them. David Chen, who had seen his share of corporate raids, raised an eyebrow. A hostile takeover of Thorn Capital? They're old money, Leo. Entrenched. It will be a street fight. They're a dinosaur, I corrected him, pointing to a projection on the screen showing their stock price's slow, steady decline. And a meteor is coming. We are not going to fight them. We are going to buy their bones at a discount. For the next hour, I laid out the plan. It was a campaign of 1,000 cuts, executed with the silent patience of a predator. We would use a series of anonymous shell corporations and offshore entities to begin accumulating their stock. Never enough at one time to trigger SEC reporting requirements. It would be a slow, invisible bleed. Sarah and Ben would create a dedicated instance of Nexus to monitor Thorn Capital exclusively, predicting their every move, identifying their every weakness, and telling us the precise optimal moment to buy. David would orchestrate the financial mechanics, a silent puppet master pulling strings from the shadows. They didn't ask me why. They didn't need to. In my voice, they heard not the greed of a corporate raider, but the conviction of a man settling a score as old as the world. The campaign began. Weeks turned into months. While Phoenix Data continued its meteoric public rise, becoming a legend in the tech world, our secret war against Thorn Capital progressed in the darkness. Every bad decision Marcus made, every client he lost, caused his company's stock to dip. And every time it dipped, we were there, a silent, unseen net, buying up the discounted shares. Meanwhile, I followed Clara's life from a distance. She had fully embraced her role. Her social media was a curated gallery of a life of effortless luxury, a ski trip in Gstad, a summer yachting trip in the Mediterranean, a front-row seat at Paris Fashion Week. In one photo, she stood next to Marcus at a museum gala. He had his arm around her, a possessive, proprietary gesture. She was smiling for the camera, but I could see something in her eyes that wasn't there before, a certain brittleness. The starlight I once knew was gone, replaced by the hard, reflective sheen of a well-polished stone. An announcement followed a few months later. Marcus Thorn, CEO of Thorn Capital, engaged to Ms. Clara Reed. The article featured a picture of them, her hand held up to display a diamond the size of a small bird's egg. I looked at the photo, at the man who had bought her future, and felt nothing but a cold, clarifying focus. He wasn't just my rival anymore. He was the symbol of the entire system I was going to dismantle. The tipping point, the fatal blow to Thorn Capital, came from an unexpected direction. They had managed the endowment for a prestigious old money university for over 50 years. It was a legacy account, a cornerstone of their reputation. But the university's new board chairman was a younger, forward-thinking woman who was unimpressed by tradition. She put the endowment contract up for review. Marcus, supremely confident, made his usual pitch based on history, stability, and personal relationships. His competitor, a fund secretly using Phoenix Data, came in with a presentation driven entirely by predictive analytics. They showed with terrifying accuracy how Thorn's strategy had underperformed the market for 8 of the last 10 quarters. They presented a new strategy, powered by Nexus, that promised not just stability, but optimized, data-driven growth. Marcus never stood a chance. The university pulled the endowment. It was a devastating public humiliation. The news hit the financial press like a thunderclap. Thorn Capital was no longer just struggling, it was sinking. Their stock price cratered, and we were there to buy it. Desperation makes men do foolish things. Marcus Thorn, a man who had sneered at the tech world, now saw it as his only salvation. His advisors told him his only hope was a merger, an infusion of new blood, new technology, new thinking. And there was only one name in the tech world that mattered, the one firm whose power was both legendary and mysterious: Phoenix Data. One morning, an email landed in David Chen's inbox. It was from the office of Marcus Thorn, formally requesting a meeting to discuss a potential strategic partnership. David forwarded it to me without comment. I opened the email and read the names on the proposed attendee list: Marcus Thorn, CEO, and accompanying him his fiancée, Ms. Clara Reed. My heart, which I had thought for years was little more than a muscle for pumping blood, gave a single, hard thud against my ribs. It was time. The final act was about to begin. I stood up and walked to the vast window of my office. 5 years. 5 years of exile and obsession. 5 years of building an empire from the ashes of a broken heart. Down below, the city hummed with life, a million stories unfolding in the concrete canyons. But up here, in the silent air of the top floor, there was only one story that mattered. I looked at my reflection in the glass. The boy she left on the sidewalk was gone. In his place stood the man who now held her entire constructed world in the palm of his hand. I turned back to my desk and typed my reply to David. Accept the meeting. The morning of the meeting, the sky over Manhattan was a brilliant cloudless blue. It was the kind of crisp autumn day that felt full of promise, the air electric with the city's ceaseless energy. From my office, I watched the traffic flow like blood through the veins of the metropolis. I felt a strange and profound calm, the stillness of a predator that has waited patiently in the reeds and now sees its prey walking towards the water's edge. I had given my team specific, meticulous instructions. Marcus and Clara were to be treated with the utmost professional courtesy, but also with an undercurrent of intimidating formality. They would be met in the lobby not by a receptionist, but by our head of security, a former Secret Service agent who moved with a silent, imposing grace. They would be escorted to a private elevator, one that required a biometric scan and brought directly to the top-floor boardroom. There would be no small talk, no offer of coffee, just a quiet, sterile procession into the heart of my power. I watched them arrive on the security feed. A silver Rolls-Royce, a newer model than the one I remembered, pulled up to the curb. The chauffeur opened the door. Marcus Thorn stepped out, looking exactly as he had in the press photos. Tall, confident, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his suit radiating an aura of generational wealth. He looked up at the tower, a flicker of something, annoyance, intimidation, crossing his features before being quickly suppressed. Then Clara emerged. My breath caught in my throat, a purely involuntary reaction. She was transformed. The Waitress uniform was a ghost of a memory. She wore a Chanel suit the color of cream, her hair styled in a flawless chignon. She carried a Birkin bag that probably cost more than our old apartment's annual rent. She was a perfect work of art, a sculpture of success and social grace. But as she stood on the sidewalk, she adjusted the cuff of her jacket with a small, nervous gesture, a flicker of the girl I knew, a tiny crack in the perfect porcelain facade. I waited. I let them sit in the boardroom for precisely 7 minutes. The room itself was a weapon. It was a cavernous space, minimalist to the point of being ascetic. 3 of the walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a dizzying 180-degree view of the city. The 4th wall was a seamless black screen, currently dormant. The only furniture was a single massive table of polished obsidian and a series of stark, uncomfortable-looking chairs. It was a room designed to make visitors feel small, exposed, and insignificant. David Chen sat at one end of the table, his face a mask of polite neutrality. I watched on my monitor as Marcus tried to engage him in conversation, a master of the universe attempting to establish dominance in a new territory. David answered in clipped, non-committal sentences, offering him nothing. Clara sat silently, her hands folded primly on the table in front of her. She stared out at the view, her expression unreadable. At the 7-minute mark, I stood up, straightened my tie, and walked out of my office. The walk down the marble hallway was the longest of my life. Each step was a footfall in history, the closing of a circle 5 years in the making. The sound of my leather-soled shoes on the stone was the only sound, a steady, deliberate rhythm. I pushed open the heavy glass doors to the boardroom and stepped inside. The air in the room changed. It wasn't a sound or a movement, but a sudden, palpable shift in atmospheric pressure. I felt it before I saw it on their faces. David Chen stood up out of respect. Marcus and Clara turned in their chairs toward the door, and then they saw me. Time seemed to slow down, to stretch and distort. I watched the sequence of emotions play across Clara's face, like a time-lapse film of a flower withering. First, a flicker of polite curiosity for the person entering the room. Then, a dawning, confused recognition, her brow furrowing slightly. Then, the full cataclysmic impact of understanding. Her perfectly composed face shattered. Her mouth fell open slightly. A small, sharp intake of breath was the only sound she made, a tiny gasp of pure, soul-shaking disbelief. All the color drained from her face, leaving her porcelain skin looking like fragile, translucent china. She looked like she had seen a ghost. And in a way she had. Marcus's reaction was slower, more analytical. He stared, his mind clearly racing, trying to connect the dots. He looked from me to Clara, saw the look on her face, and then back to me. I could see the gears turning as he tried to reconcile the image of the broke, pathetic boy his fiancée had once described, the boy with the fantasy and the broken laptop, with the man standing before him, the phantom architect of the most powerful tech firm in the world. He was a man who believed in a predictable, ordered universe, and I was a variable he could not compute. I didn't acknowledge their shock. I didn't smile. I didn't offer a hand. I walked with a steady, unhurried pace to the head of the table, the seat opposite David. I placed my tablet on the obsidian surface and looked at them both, letting the silence hang in the air, thick and heavy with 5 years of unspoken history. "Mr. Thorne," I began, my voice calm, level, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Thank you for coming." My gaze swept past him to Clara, my eyes meeting hers for a fraction of a second. It was like touching a live wire. I saw a universe of shock and panic in her eyes before she quickly looked down at her hands on the table. "You requested this meeting to discuss a strategic partnership. I'm here to give you our analysis." I tapped my tablet. The black wall behind me flickered to life, displaying the Phoenix Data logo for a moment before transitioning to a slide deck. But this wasn't my presentation. It was theirs. It was a deep dive analysis of Thorne Capital. The foundation of any partnership is a mutual understanding of strengths and weaknesses, I said, my voice resonating in the quiet room. "So, let's start with your company." For the next 20 minutes, I systematically, dispassionately, and ruthlessly dissected their entire company. I used the Nexus algorithm to lay their every flaw bare. I showed them their declining revenue streams in brutal, downward-sloping graphs. I highlighted their portfolio's overexposure in dying industries. I displayed charts showing their client attrition rate accelerating over the past 36 months. I even brought up internal communications, showing their own analysts warning of the very issues Marcus had publicly ignored. I spoke of their impending irrelevance not as a possibility, but as a foregone conclusion, a mathematical certainty. I used their own data, their own history, to prove that they were not a viable partner. They were a liability. I was a surgeon explaining to a patient, with detached clinical precision, exactly how the cancer had spread. Marcus's face went from confident to confused to ashen. His imperious composure was being stripped away, layer by layer, with every slide. He tried to interrupt twice, to object, but I simply held up a hand and continued, my voice never wavering. Clara didn't move. She sat frozen, her gaze fixed on the screen, on the undeniable data that was systematically obliterating the foundation of the world she had chosen. She wasn't just watching a company die, she was watching her life's bargain go up in flames. Only when I was finished did I finally turn off the screen. The room plunged back into a heavy silence, broken only by the faint hum of the building's climate control. I let the weight of the moment settle. Then I turned my gaze fully on them. I looked directly at Marcus Thorne, a man who had never been told no in his life. "Phoenix Data will not be partnering with you," I stated, the words landing like stones in the silent room. "Instead," I paused, letting the word hang in the air, We will be acquiring you. Marcus actually laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. Acquiring us? That's absurd. My company is not for sale. Your company has been for sale for the last 18 months, Mr. Thorne, I said, my voice dangerously soft. You just weren't the one selling it. I tapped my tablet again. The screen behind me lit up with a new diagram, a complex web of shell corporations and offshore holding companies. For the past 18 months, we have been systematically accumulating your stock. As of 9:01 this morning, when the market opened, a final series of block trades were executed. Phoenix Data, through its subsidiaries, now controls 54% of Thorne Capital's voting shares. Your company is already mine. This meeting was not a negotiation. It was a courtesy. The blood drained from Marcus's face. He looked at David Chen, who simply gave a slow, deliberate nod. The truth was undeniable. He was beaten, utterly and completely. I looked at him, a man who had judged my worth by the contents of my wallet, and saw nothing but a hollow shell. You buy assets, Mr. Thorne, I build empires. Then my gaze finally settled on Clara. I allowed a trace of the boy she had known to surface in my voice, but laced it with the ice of the man I had become. You chose a silver car over a dream, Clara, I said softly. The words meant only for her. You saw a broken laptop and called it a broken man, but you failed to understand something fundamental. You failed to understand that some people can't see true value until it's presented as a line item on a quarterly report. A dream, it turns out, can buy more than a car. It can buy the company that makes them. Her eyes, wide and shimmering with unshed tears, were locked on mine. In them I saw the ghost of the girl who had believed in me, now trapped inside the woman who had betrayed me. The final blow wasn't financial, it was poetic. It was personal. As the new owner, I announced, my voice hardening again as I looked back at Marcus, my first executive order will be to dissolve the Thorne Capital division entirely. Your name will be stripped from the letterhead. Your legacy is over. I let that sink in. The assets will be liquidated, and the proceeds, I said, pausing for effect, will be used to fund a new philanthropic foundation I am establishing, the Nexus Grant. I looked from his broken face to her shattered one. It will be dedicated to providing seed money for brilliant, underfunded young innovators who have nothing but an idea, a grant to give them the $500 they might need to fix their broken laptops so that their dreams aren't dismissed as fantasies. The symmetry was perfect. The justice was absolute. Marcus Thorne was obliterated, his name and legacy erased, his wealth repurposed to fuel the very kind of person he would have dismissed. And Clara stood frozen, the luxurious fabric of her designer suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume. The life of security she had traded everything for was an illusion, a house of cards built on a foundation of sand, and I had just kicked it over. I didn't wait for a response. There was nothing more to say. My vindication was complete. I hadn't sought revenge. I had sought to rebalance the universe, to prove that the dream was real. I had built a new world from the rubble of the old one. I stood up, turned my back on them, and walked toward the glass doors, leaving them alone in the ruins of their choices. I didn't look back. Walking out of that boardroom was like stepping out of a time machine. For 5 years I had been living in a singular timeline, one that led directly to that moment of absolute, crushing victory. Every sleepless night, every line of code, every sacrifice had been a step on a path culminating in that silent, glass-walled room. As the heavy doors swished shut behind me, the sound seemed to sever the final thread connecting me to my past. I didn't go back to my office. I went to the private elevator, rode it down to the ground floor, and walked out of the Phoenix Tower into the crisp autumn air. I walked for hours, just as I had the night she left me. But this time it wasn't a desperate, aimless shamble. It was a measured, deliberate stride. I was no longer a ghost haunting the city. I was its master, a man who could see the invisible algorithms that governed its every move. Yet the victory felt quiet. It wasn't the explosive, cathartic release I had imagined. It was a cold, clean, and strangely hollow satisfaction. I had proven them wrong. I had won the war. But now, standing on the other side of it, I found myself alone on the battlefield. Days turned into a week. The financial world was in an uproar over the hostile takeover of Thorne Capital. The press called it a digital blitzkrieg, a stunning coup by the enigmatic Phoenix Data. David Chen handled the media storm with his usual unflappable grace, feeding them carefully crafted narratives about innovation, disruption, and the dawn of a new era in finance. My name was never mentioned. I remained the ghost in the machine. I oversaw the dismantling of Thorn Capital from my office, a process I delegated with ruthless efficiency. The name was scrubbed, the offices cleared, the assets liquidated. It was like erasing a line of bad code. During this time, I heard nothing from Clara or Marcus. It was as if they had vanished from the face of the earth. I didn't seek them out. Part of me was content to let them fade into the obscurity they had once tried to condemn me to. But another part, a small persistent part I couldn't silence, was curious. What happens to people after their world is completely destroyed? Nexus, of course, had the answer. I tasked the system with a simple passive search query. Locate Clara Reed. It took less than a second. She wasn't at the lavish Fifth Avenue penthouse she had shared with Marcus. She was back in Brooklyn, in a small, nondescript apartment building just a few blocks from our old place. The life of chauffeured cars and designer gowns was over. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. 2 weeks after the meeting, a package arrived at my office. It was a simple, brown cardboard box with no return address, addressed simply to Leo Maxwell. My security team had already scanned it for any threats, of course. It was clean. Inside, resting on a bed of tissue paper, was my old, battered laptop, the one that had died 5 years ago. Taped to the lid was a single folded sheet of paper. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded it. It was a letter, written in her familiar, elegant script. "Leo," it began, "I don't expect you to read this, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. I have been replaying that day in the boardroom over and over in my mind. The shock hasn't worn off. I don't think it ever will. Seeing you standing there, it was like seeing a force of nature. I don't know what I expected. Maybe I thought you were still in a garage somewhere, still dreaming. It was easier to believe that. It made my choice feel less wrong. Marcus and I are no longer together. The foundation of our relationship, I see now, was made of paper, and when the fire came, it burned to ash in an instant. He called me a gold digger, a bad investment. He blamed me for bringing you into his orbit, as if I had orchestrated his downfall. He wasn't wrong in a way. I was a bad investment. I invested in the wrong things. I chose certainty over faith. I chose comfort over love. I was a coward, Leo. I was terrified of our struggle, of the uncertainty. I let that fear blind me to what was right in front of me, a brilliant, beautiful man who saw magic in the world. I took this laptop from your old apartment before the landlord cleared it out. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe as a reminder of the boy I left behind. Now I see it for what it is, a reminder of the man I was too blind to see. This is yours. The dream inside it was always real. I was the fantasy. Clara. I sat there, holding the letter for a long time. The words were a quiet, devastating confession. There was no excuse-making, no plea for a second chance. It was just the raw, unvarnished truth. And it undid me in a way my victory never could. The cold diamond of pain in my chest, the one I had nurtured and weaponized for 5 years, began to melt. It was replaced by a grief that was profound and deeply human. I wasn't grieving the loss of her, not anymore. I was grieving for the 2 kids we had been, the ones who had believed they could build a world on a foundation of ramen and love in a 5th-floor walk-up. The laptop felt heavy in my hands. It was a relic from another life, a fossil of a boy who had died on a Brooklyn sidewalk 5 years ago. I thought about the Nexus grant. I had created it as a final poetic act of justice, a way to rub their noses in my success. But now, holding Clara's letter, I saw it differently. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about honoring the boy I used to be. It was about ensuring that other dreamers, other kids in garages with nothing but a brilliant idea, wouldn't have their futures decided by a $500 repair bill. It was about turning my pain into someone else's possibility. It was in that moment that I finally understood what I had to do next. My anonymity had been a shield, a weapon, but it had also become a prison. I was living at the top of a glass tower, but I was completely alone, disconnected from the world I was so expertly analyzing. The ghost in the machine was tired of haunting. A month later, I called a press conference. The announcement sent shockwaves through the industry. The reclusive, mysterious founder of Phoenix Data was finally going to show his face. The room was packed with journalists from every major news outlet in the world, their cameras poised, their questions ready. The air buzzed with anticipation. David Chen walked onto the stage first and gave a brief introduction. Then he said the words I had kept hidden for so long. "Ladies and gentlemen, the founder and CEO of Phoenix Data, Mr. Leo Maxwell." I walked out from the wings and into the blinding flash of cameras. I felt 1,000 eyes on me, 1,000 questions hanging in the air. I walked to the podium, looked out at the sea of faces, and began to speak. I didn't talk about algorithms or quarterly earnings. I told them a story. I told them about a boy in a small apartment in Brooklyn. I told them about a dream called Nexus, a broken laptop, and a girl he loved who lost her faith. I told them about the $500 that had felt like $1 million. I laid my past bare, not as a tale of revenge, but as a story of origin, of transformation. I announced that I was stepping down as CEO of Phoenix Data. David Chen would be my successor. I would remain as chairman of the board, but my primary focus would be on a new role, executive director of the Nexus grant. I explained its mission: to find and fund the undiscovered geniuses, the brilliant minds working in obscurity, the ones the traditional gatekeepers of capital would never notice. Talent is universal, I said, my voice ringing with a conviction that came from the very core of my being. Opportunity is not. We aim to fix that. We will invest in people, not just in business plans. We will bet on possibility, not just on certainty. The press conference was the lead story on every network that night. The myth of the ghost in the machine was replaced by the far more compelling story of the man who had built an empire from a broken dream. A few days later, I was in a coffee shop in Brooklyn, not far from my new, much smaller apartment. I was reviewing the first batch of applications for the grant, my heart swelling with a kind of hope I hadn't felt in years. The ideas were brilliant, raw, and full of the same starry-eyed ambition I once had. The door opened and a bell chimed. I looked up and my breath caught. It was Clara. She was wearing simple jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked real. The polished perfection was gone, replaced by a quiet vulnerability. She saw me and hesitated at the door as if she might turn and run. I gave her a small, gentle nod. She walked over to my table. "Hello, Leo," she said, her voice soft. "Hi, Clara," I replied. Can I sit down?" I gestured to the empty chair across from me. She sat, her hands fidgeting with a napkin. "I saw the press conference," she said. "What you're doing, it's incredible. It's what you were always meant to do." "It's what we were meant to do," I corrected her gently. "The original idea was born in that old apartment, remember? You were a part of that." A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but this time it wasn't a tear of shock or regret. It looked like a tear of release. "I'm working at the diner again," she said, a small wry smile on her lips. "The Sparrow's Nest. The new owner is a lot nicer. It's honest work. It feels good to be tired for a real reason again." We sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, the ghosts of our past settling peacefully between us. The anger was gone. The pain was gone. All that was left was a deep, quiet understanding. We were two different people now, irrevocably changed by the choices we had made. We could never go back to being the kids in the fifth-floor walk-up, but maybe we could find a new beginning. "I'm reviewing the first round of grant applications," I said, pushing the pile of papers across the table toward her. "I could use a second opinion, someone who's good at spotting the difference between a real dream and a fantasy." She looked at me, a genuine, hesitant smile spreading across her face. It was the smile I remembered, the one that had held all the starlight in the universe. "I think," she said, picking up the first application, "I'd like that very much." Our story wasn't a fairy tale of love rekindled, but something more real and perhaps more profound. It was a story of forgiveness, of second chances, and of finding your way back not to a person, but to the best version of yourself. In a world of cold data and calculated outcomes, we had discovered that the most powerful algorithm of all is the one that governs the human heart, its capacity for pain, its resilience, and its endless, astonishing ability to heal. Together, we were no longer defined by the billionaire who had bought the world or the waitress who had sold her soul. We were just two people, helping other dreamers fix their broken laptops, building a new future, one impossible idea at a time. And in that shared purpose, we found a richness that all the money in the world could never buy.